Howdy folks, welcome to the Power of Words. I'm Buck. Today's poem is called The Man That Couldn't Kill, and it's one of my originals that I wrote about 2 years ago. Hope you enjoy it. I was sitting in the saloon feeling old and tired and sore when a man walked up to the bar who I'd never seen before. Now, I'm not a hard drinking man, but this night I'd had too much, drowning out the memories of broken hearts, lost friends and such. I was running off at the mouth and waving my arms around, and I said something I knew I'd regret as the man pulled a stool and sat down. He looked at me, smiled, and said, "Friend, you want to come again?" I had a chance to settle things down, but instead I said, "Who you calling friend?" I was looking for a fight, and he was willing to oblige. My hand fell to my gun that was hanging at my side. But the old man was quicker than most I'd seen, and his gun was at my chest and his face looked awful mean. 2 bottles of whiskey, but I sobered up then and there. I said, "Please forgive me, mister, but I'm mourning the loss of a dear friend. You can shoot me if you like, and you'd be well within your right. And if that is your decision, I'd like to ask one favor tonight. I'd like to tell you a story, mister, if you'll let me tell it one last time. I kind of feel I owe it to that dear old friend of mine." Well, the old man sat back and just looked at me a while, then said, "Go ahead and tell it. I kind of like your style." Well, I cleared my throat as I thought and slowly scratched my head, wondering where to start, and then finally I said, "I know you've heard the legend of the man they call Wild Bill, but there's one whose legend is greater than any buried up on that hill. Most knew him as William Canton. I just called him Little Will. He was a wiry kind of man who stood only 5'5". He definitely wasn't the biggest or the strongest man alive, but he was full of gumption and a whole mess of grit. If there was something that needed doing, then Little Will was the man to do it. Now, most don't believe my stories, but I swear to you it's true, because I rode with him for nearly 20 years and saw the things he'd do. I was there the day he saved the coach from the Injuns' party raid as they hooped and hollered and circled all around the stage. He grabbed his rifle, opened the door, looked back at us and gave a wink. "Y'all just sit here where it's cool and safe. I can handle this, I think." And he went out into the sun, 1 man against 25. And if that's good odds for any man, then he's the best man alive. I heard the report of his rifle time and time again. And I saw those Injuns fall from their horses into the sand. And soon the noise had ended and he opened up the door. He winked at us and smiled, saying, "Be thankful there wasn't more." I was down to my last shell, but 2 of them remained. I waited and through my sights I strained, until at last they lined up, straight there in my sights. It was a shot no man should make, not by any rights. But I closed my eyes before firing and quickly said a little prayer. When I opened my eyes to look again, 2 men were lying there. Well, as I finished my story, the old man looked at me and said, "He sounds like he was quite a man. I'm sorry that he's dead." "That's not all," I quickly answered. "There's still stories left to tell. If you'd like to hear more about Little Will, then just sit there a spell." I remember the time the Thompson boys came riding into town. They were drunk and looking for trouble with anyone who was around. Little Will and I, to protect the folks, met them out in the street. They said some things to both of us that I'm too gentleman to repeat. There was 5 of them boys, and all were handy with a gun. Little Will looked at me, winked, and said, "It's time to have some fun." The oldest boy, foolishly, was the first to make his move. A wild and reckless lad, he always had something to prove. No sooner had he cleared his gun from his belt, Little Will shot it from his hands. To the ground it fell. The other 4 boys, with fear and awe in their eyes, moved their hands away from their guns as they quickly realized that 5 on 2 odds weren't as good as they had thought. not against the skill with a gun that little Will had brought. I asked the barkeep for some water to loosen up my voice. It seemed the old man hadn't settled on a choice. So I just rambled on, telling him yet another tale of the days I rode with little Will on that long and dusty trail. There was the time that we were riding hard across the open plain to escape the coming storm and find shelter from the rain. And Will's horse went down and threw him with a pitch over the horse's head, and he landed in a ditch. As I stopped my horse and turned myself around, I saw little Will surrounded by rattlers sitting on the ground. I saw his face twist, and he kept yelling out in pain as the rattlers were sinking their fangs into him time and time again. By the time I lowered a rope and pulled my good friend free, I could see he was in trouble as his eyes looked up at me. He had so many bites, I stopped counting at 21. I told him he would be all right, but I knew right there my friend was done. He winked at me and smiled and said, "I just need a little rest. Those snakes may have given their all, but they haven't seen my best." He closed his eyes and slipped away, and I cried to see him go. But when morning came, to my surprise, I found there was more for me to know. Little Will was sitting up, and he had a smile upon his face. He winked at me and said, "I ain't gonna die in this kind of place." He handed me a snake that he had cooked on the fire. "I swear this story's true, mister. No man can call me a liar." Well, the old man looked at me, and I saw a partial smile. He said, "Go on with your stories. I'll give you a little while." So I told him about the time the Carson gang came to town. They were the meanest and toughest gang there was around. They started a fight sometime just past noon in the corner of the bar and tore up old man Greeley's saloon. And little Will walked in and told him it was time to settle down. They could learn to act like gentlemen, or he'd see them out of town. Now, one snuck up behind him and broke a chair across his back. But little Will don't take kindly to no cowardly attack. And he tore into that man with fists that moved so fast, the man never saw the first punch, and he sure didn't see the last. Then the whole gang surrounded him, closing in for the kill. I did my best to help him, but there was no saving little Will. It took 8 men to hold him. He put up such a fight. They beat on him all day long, and then they strung him up that night. And as I helplessly watched my friend dangle from that tree, I saw little Will smile, and then he winked at me. Then that old tree branch, it gave out a mighty crack, and Will came falling down, straight on his horse's back. As the Carson gang watched their mouths all open wide, little Will disappeared into the distance as fast as he could ride. Those boys all got their horses and set off to hunt my friend down. But after 2 days, it was only little Will that rode back into town. He rode his exhausted horse, with 17 others following in its track. But none of those other horses had riders on their back. As I finished telling that story, I had drawn quite a crowd. "Tell us another one about little Will," I heard someone cry aloud. So I told about the time the Cheyenne had captured Will, and they took him to their village hidden high up in the hills. They tied him to a stake and watched his skin burn in the sun. 4 days with no food or water. It looked like Will was done. Then they dragged him naked to a cave where lived a mean old grizzly bear. And they blocked off the entrance to the cave and left little Will in there. For 2 months I had searched, looking for my dear friend to save, when finally I stumbled upon the entrance to that cave. With help from a trapper, I uncovered the entrance, dreading what I'd find, fighting against the fear and doubt that were clawing at my mind. The cave was dark, and as I walked, I heard bones crack beneath my feet, and to my nose there came a smell, the rank of rotting meat. My eyes slowly adjusted just enough that I could see, face coming out of the darkness. It was little Will smiling at me. 2 cold months with a grizzly bear in a cave trapped inside. And here stood little Will with his belly full and wearing a bearskin hide. Tell us about the time, I heard somebody say, when Will was out picking fruit and got attacked by a mountain lion and killed it with his boot. No, I said, there's only one more story that I think I'm going to tell. It's about the day that little Will died, and I hope I tell it well. It was a dark and stormy day, and we were high up on a hill, roping strays to return to ranch, just me and little Will. The sky was black as night, and the clouds began to swirl. I'll never forget that sight. It looked like the end of the world. And Will was tossing his rope at a stray that was running by when a funnel cloud formed and descended from the sky. It was the biggest twister any man had ever seen. Will lassoed that tornado and it lifted him high above the evergreens. And the last I ever saw of William Canton, my dear friend, was when he winked at me and smiled and said, "This is not the end." Well, that was 20 years ago to this very day. That's why I'm drowning my sorrows, trying to chase the memory away. So I finished my story, and there was silence all around, until the old man slapped his hand on the bar and from his stool got down. He said, "I believe your stories about your friend you call Little Will." Then he winked at me and smiled and said, "'Cause I'm the man they couldn't kill." So my apologies for messing up in a few places. It's a long poem, and my throat gets really dry trying to recite it. And for those who may not have caught the ending, the old man that he was telling the story to was his friend Little Will. He was the man they couldn't kill. He'd been through all that, and he'd fought the Indians. He'd been bitten by the snakes. He'd been left in the cave with a bear. He'd lassoed a tornado. Maybe been attacked by a puppy. But here he was 20 years later, alive and well, and he'd found his old friend again. So I hope you enjoyed the poem. I'm Buck, and this has been The Power of Words. And this little critter here is Shiloh. He's my good buddy. So if you like the poem and you want to hear more of my originals and of some old classics, then just like and subscribe, and I'll catch you down the road. Get your tongue out my ear, Shiloh. Bye. You funny little critter.